Hi guys, hope you had a good weekend. Showed your mothers some love, just showed them how much they mean to you. Um, but last week, guys, we had a conversation about World War II, and we talked about the build up to the war. We talked about the start of the war, and we left off. We really talked about how Nazi Germany had basically control of all of Europe. So either they controlled those territories or they were neutral territories. So all of Europe, they famously called it Fortress Europe, that they controlled all of this mainland continental Europe. And so only the UK is holding out. Remember, we talked about they were able to win the Battle of Britain and keep the Nazis, the Germans, from invading because they couldn't knock out the British air power, which was key to an invasion. And so that's where we left off, guys. And when Hitler um, loses in Britain and he's not able to invade Britain, he basically turns his attention to Russia, to the Soviet Union. So his old ally, or his old enemy, excuse me, his old enemy, the communists. And so he invades Russia. Um, After that, guys, in 1941, and so now the Soviets are a part of the Allies. They're fighting against the Nazis as well. And then you have Japan. They've moved into China, like we talked about. You have um, the Japanese army. They're looking to expand into southeastern Asia as well because they need all these resources. Japan is very limited on their resources. They're fighting this long drawn out war against China, and so they need that to keep fighting. And at the same time, the United States, we share the Pacific with Japan. We're saying, whoa, 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 no, you guys need to get out of China. You need to stop, being so aggressive in the Pacific. Um, and so we stop sending them oil and scrap iron. So two key components to fighting a war: metal and oil. So obviously, the combustion engine is very very important in World War II fighting, and so uh, this really puts the Japanese in a tough position. Do we lose face and get out of China so we can resume getting oil and scrap iron, and basically give up our dreams of having an Asian empire, um, or do we try and take the fight to America and hope we can kind of knock them out of action long enough to where we can take all these possessions in Southeast Asia, in the Southern Pacific, and get all these natural resources and dig in and say, come get us, America, if you want, but it's going to be long drawn out, and hope that they get tired of fighting. So there's no thought in Japan, guys, of, hey, we're going to go in and we're going to attack the United States of America and we're going to conquer them. It was, okay, we want to have this Pacific Empire, Asian Empire. Um, America's kind of standing in our way. We need to do something to get them out of our way so we can move in and take possession of that. And so Japan, guys, that's when they decide to make the attack on Pearl Harbor. So December 7th, 1941, a day that will live in infamy, and that's how the United States got into World War II, which Winston Churchill had a hard time. Prime Minister of the UK, of Great Britain, had a hard time, not displaying his excitement that Pearl Harbor happened, because he knew that the United States was going to be in the war now and that we were going to be their allies, and that meant that the Allies were probably going to win the war. Uh, so yeah, now the United States is in it. We're fighting a two-front war. We're fighting in the Pacific. We're fighting over in Europe as well. And I want to talk about the rest of this video, guys, really where it turned around. Because, like I said, the Nazis, they controlled basically all of Europe. They're moving into Russia. They're getting close to the capital of Russia, Moscow. So their advanced scouts can see the peaks of the Kremlin, which was the old, basically kind of castle-like building in Moscow, the capital of the Soviet Union. And so they're close. They're close to conquering the Soviets. Um, they are operating in North Africa with the Italians, and they're close. They're getting close to Egypt and the Suez Canal. And if they take the Suez Canal, they close off all of the colonies in the Indian Ocean for the British, right? So the British have been moving through the Med and then through the Suez Canal out into these areas, and so that's going to cut off their trade, and they're going to be done. They're not going to be able to have that trade anymore. They're probably going to run out of money, and they're going to have to surrender. And then you have the Japanese guys. When they attacked Pearl Harbor, they had this huge attack laid out all over Asia. So when they move in and attack Pearl Harbor right after that, they attacked the American-controlled Philippines. Okay, they move into what they call Indochina, so Laos, Vietnam, Cambodia, Thailand. They attack India. They attack um, the islands in the South Pacific, particularly Malaysia and Indonesia, Singapore, which is Singapore is a big one. Lots of riches and wealth there. Was a British colony. So, and they knock out the British at Singapore. They knock out the United States Army in the Philippines. They're getting closer and closer to conquering India and China. So they're gaining more and more territory. They've taken control of all these little islands, Guam, Wake Island. Um, so it's looking like a bad situation all around for the Allies in 1941. Well, 1942, November 1942, so at the end of 1942, you start to see a turnaround. And Winston Churchill, in his um, set of books that he wrote, kind of his memoirs about World War II, he calls this the hinge of fate. So, November 1942, the Russians they break through at this place called Stalingrad on the Volga River. Which Stalingrad's a key industrial city in Russia. Obviously, bears the name of its leader Stalin, so that was a particular importance to them in that sense. And so the Germans just devote more and more and more troops to taking Stalingrad, um, which was not necessarily they didn't have to take the city, but once they were in, they were into the death. And so in November 1942, the Russians have a breakthrough in Stalingrad, and they start to encircle the German army. So it's the shoes on the other foot there. Um, in Egypt, the British defeat the Germans at the Battle of El Alamein, is what it's called. So this kind of base in North Africa and Egypt that's not too far from the Suez Canal. If the Germans take El Alamein, they're probably going to get all the way to the Indian Ocean, and it's game over for trade in the Indian Ocean for the British. And so they defeat the Germans at El Alamein in November 1942. And then in the Pacific, in the Solomon Islands, so right here, the Solomon Islands, you have this island called Guadalcanal, and the Japanese had put a lot of um, resources and men into building an airfield at Guadalcanal that could threaten Australia, which Australia is our big line of communication. Really, we're going to have to operate um, clear back at the Hawaiian Islands um, to be able to do anything against the Japanese if we lose this battle, because we're probably going to lose Australia. if they can take Guadalcanal and put an airfield there, start bombing Australia and make it untenable. Um, so big consequences with that battle. U.S. forces, they break through and turn the tide in Guadalcanal too at that time. And so everything kind of turns and shifts. So that's why Churchill calls it the hinge of fate. So this is where we see the Allies start to take the initiative, and momentum swings in the Allies' favor. And from there on out, guys, it's victory after victory. Sure, there's some setbacks, but it's victory after victory basically for the Allies then on out, heading into 1943, and the war will finish in 1945. So, all right, guys, that's it for today. Hope you have a good week, and I will talk to you soon.